So we're going to switch gears quite a bit and move into trees, or more or less the carbon market. So the carbon market exists because companies are under pressure to meet their climate, sustainability, and net zero goals. And what this does is turn a unit of carbon into an actual commodity that a company can then buy. And what happens when this market functions perfectly is not only does it give companies the opportunity to adhere to regulation and to avoid risk, but also creates investment opportunities in things that restore nature. This means kelp forests, ecosystem restoration, and even reforestation activities. So we all know that markets themselves, far from perfect. So what does that mean? That means that as a result of a lack of transparency, individuals have actually taken advantage of this new and emerging market. Speculators have gotten in to make quick profits as a result of the newness and kind of lack of information around the whole space. And additionally, even issuers of carbon credits that are the most reputable in the industry, like South Pole, have been criticized for issuing over 200 million euros worth of credits that may not have actually removed any carbon from the atmosphere. And removing carbon from the atmosphere is the key concept that is necessary to focus on, because that is what requires the trust and transparency needed to make this market function. Not everything bought and sold in the carbon market is a verified unit of carbon removal. Some of it's avoidance. Some of it is very difficult to prove that anything actually happened as a result of this tree continuing to stay alive. And so in order to really understand the difference between a unit of carbon removed, more transparency is necessary, not just on the individuals or the projects like the reforestation, like the kelp forest, and not just on the corporate ESG commitments of the different companies that are required to buy these carbon credits, but rather on all of the 9 market makers in the middle that are part of that process of creating a carbon credit. And since the focus is on transparency, of course, everyone in Web3 is super stoked because it presents a great use case, not only for NFTs, but of all other sorts of Web3 applications and mechanisms and fungible currencies. So since 2016, there have been a handful of projects that have come on board related to everything from carbon futures, so trading a unit of carbon that will be created maybe 5 years from now, or come onto the market in 6 years when the tree is fully grown. Actually trading a unit or a carbon removal unit that has been verified on an existing blockchain, using the NFTs as a way to incorporate monitoring, reporting, and verification data of what's actually happening into the digital token itself. This space kind of went crazy in 2021. It exploded. And I think this might even be out of date because so many projects have come on and gone offline since then. But if we're really going to dive into some of the use cases, which would be what we're doing at the moment, we can look into monitoring, reporting, and verification because that is exactly where NFTs play a key role. And the way that that works is you have satellite imagery, say data from remote sensors like ground sensing, so actually little monitors that are put into the soil, drones that can fly through a forest or over a forest and document the trees that are actually there. Of course, you also have humans that can go onto the ground, literally measure the width of a tree, and then write down the data and store all of that. And all of that verification information can actually be packed into a digital token that can then be bought and sold on an external marketplace. And with that comes the ability to then create what we like to say is an eco-conscious digital asset. And this creates an opportunity to then have this idea of being eco-conscious within a game, within the metaverse, or within your own little Twitter profile. It doesn't have to be little, it can be giant. But essentially what it signals, along with the information that it's attached to, is the ownership of a digital asset that is used to then keep the ecosystem healthy. It's not just individuals that are doing this. We also have companies that are willing and ready to buy different tokens that actually represent a verified unit of carbon removal and have the data to back it up. Some of the corporate net zero commitments, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know Flow Carbon and Regen Network are both 2 projects that have actually partnered with different corporations to offtake these tokens. If we take it a step further and look at the carbon market as a whole, we can look at tokenized carbon credits more or less as a copy of what the current market is actually already doing. So we take our major bodies like Verra, Gold Standard, and other standards set out by the UN. And then what happens is an organization like Toucan or C3 will come and buy those credits, make a copy of them, put them on chain, and then allow them to be traded. Now there's a lot of questions around this, is whether or not that capital that is then brought in to play at that point, being traded on a secondary market, is actually useful, because it, on one hand, retires the value of the credit. On the other hand, it prevents capital from going back to any sort of carbon removal initiatives. So there's a lot of complexity there. But we also see the ability to then take a token, replicate it, put it on chain, turn it into some sort of fungible asset, and then all of a sudden we have our money backed by a unit of carbon removal, which in my opinion is like an absolutely beautiful vision. Just needs some refining to get there. And of course, along the way, we've always had NFTs that are used for charity. So we could think of a digital collectible that's then allocating the funding automatically, not just to the artist itself, but perhaps to the organization that it's supporting. And regenerative finance, I would consider this more in the form of DAOs that are really focused on community governance and ensuring that there's an ability for these anyone who's actually working on the land to then partake in the profits of anything that is generated from that work, whether it be the sale of goods or potentially carbon credits themselves. And so what's important is that all of these applications actually create a meaningful use case. So it's essentially, the focus is on removing the carbon, not just buying an electric vehicle instead of a regular gas vehicle, and assuming that that is like good enough to count as a verified unit of carbon removal. Unlocking a new supply of carbon credits, so basically ensuring that whatever tools we're using to document, sell, and then bring these credits on the market are actually reaching new forms or different landowners who can then take advantage of this technology. Leapfrogging the current market and not necessarily replicating what we already have on board, because it is very difficult to scale. There's not enough emphasis on the data that's being collected. And genuine transparency and traceability, really understanding who owns this credit, why, where that money should go in order to ensure additional carbon removal, and of course, local community participation, because it doesn't make sense if none of the funding is actually sent back to the people who are doing the most work. So Sadu, it's an app that you can download. It's an example of all of this put into practice. It's a play-to-earn mobile app where you can actually collect an NFT that not only contains the monitoring, reporting, and verification data that ensures this funding is being used for ecosystem restoration, but you get a really cool badge of honor created by Stacy Ant, sitting right here, who's pretty famous, not gonna lie. So if you wanna have a chance to kind of explore all of this in action, please download the app. I'm happy to share more about it afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much.